Hey guys, it's a beautiful day to get back to work on this project. As you've seen in the past handful of videos, we've done a lot of work with the roof framing and this porch setup. And so now we'll kind of go over what we've done so far and where we're going from here. So on the front side of the porch, what we've got is our rafter tie, this beam going across the front two posts of the porch. We've got our beams that are going off and connecting to the original home. We've all our different rafters scabbed in, as well as some purlins extending out to give me the overhang on the front of the porch. What I hadn't shown, though I have added most recently, is this kind of aesthetic feature. It's a treated beam section that we're going to stain the same color as these deck posts. And that's just to add kind of a, something to catch your eye as you're walking up on the porch. As I mentioned before, these beams are going to end up getting wrapped in a fiber cement product that's going to match what's on the house. Something that we really like the look of on our back porch. So we're going to do it again here. And then we'll have a tin soffit on the exterior portion of the porch, and either a tin or perhaps tongue and groove type board going up the ceiling. We haven't yet decided on that. So then coming back to the house section of the roof though, so this is tied into the existing home. We have shingles and tar paper and everything on there, so it's all weathered in at this point. And what I'm going to be focusing on today is getting rid of this old portion of overhang that I had left. So essentially I'm going to be cutting that flush with the existing sheathing of the house, and I'm going to frame up to my rafters and tie those in so that it's one continuous wall going up this section of the porch. Up to this point, we still do not have decking on the floor. I'm still walking on rafters with some spare sheets of OSB on them. And that's just because I don't want to be damaging my composite decking by dropping tools or lumber on top of it. So it makes it a little bit more tedious to get around balancing the ladders on a sheet like this. But I think it's a necessary evil just to protect things so that the final product doesn't all scratched up when the install's done. Well guys, this is what we're dealing with. So I got that front fascia section off and some of the soffit supports. All we've got is, it looks like 1/2 inch, maybe 5/8 plywood on top of the tails of my trusses. Now I don't have any real concern with cutting these. I mean, do your own research, but I don't have any concern cutting them because these aren't really bearing any weight or supporting the roof, except at the point where they're resting on the top plates of my wall. So what I'm going to try to do is draw a level line up from my sheathing, probably actually at the top plate. Draw a level line up and cut those guys flush so that I can install some new 5/8 OSB over top of this. That'll bring it flush to these other layers. And kind of like what we had done with the other sections of the wall, I'll have to build it up a couple layers to get to the same height as what the existing or the previous siding had been down here. Up top, so this is what it looks like up in kind of my, I don't know what you'd call it, kind of a rafter cavity. I'm going to be cutting off this front portion. I'm going to get these shingles out of the way so I don't ruin my blade too terrible. But I'm going to draw the level line up, see where that intersects back here about. I may have to trim this this board that the rafter tail sits on just a little bit. It looks like I might overhang just a few inches, so I might have to trim that flush. But then I'll cut this all back and this whole front ledge will be gone. Down the road, once I'm pretty confident with the position and everything of this new wall that's going to get framed up here, I'm actually going to cut a fairly decent sized hole up in this area. That's both to allow me access in the future if I should ever need to come up here for any reason, up behind this wall is what I'm saying, as well as give me some air circulation. I've got ridge vents up along my ridge board, so there is airflow, at least definitely in this area where I've got the soffit and this vaulted ceiling. But also once I cut this cavity up in this area, I've got ridge vents extending all the way back, so I'll get air circulation there as well. Just something to keep in mind if you're doing this yourself. You don't want to build up heat pockets that can affect your roofing material, especially if it's asphalt shingles like what I've got. So maybe a slight change of plans based on what I had said before. So I don't have to waste extra material. I think I'm actually going to build out the framing for this wall so that it's flush with this MDF material. So I only need to place one layer of the 5/8 OSB. I know previously I had mentioned kind of doing this similar to the other sections of the wall where we have a couple layers of sheathing. But in this case, I don't know if I see any point. I've got an angle to work with for my bottom plate. I'll be cutting all my studs with that angle so that they go plumb, go vertical. And I can have a bottom plate that's a little bit wider. It doesn't have to be a 2x4, so that maybe I use a 2x6 or something, so that it's cut at or placed at a position where it's actually going to be flush with this surface. So that's only whatever, a 1/2 inch depth or so in this sheathing. That might keep my rafter tails cut a little bit further away from these metal plates. This electrical that you see here, there was a overhead kind of lamp in the soffit before. I'm going to repurpose these cables and actually bring a wire up to kind of a center location in my vaulted ceiling portion so that we can drop down a little bit nicer light. But for now, we'll kind of keep an eye on those, make sure I don't cut through any cords. So we have the roof deck cleaned up now. I got the tar paper and the remaining shingles cut back from here. I also went through and popped the nails on these extended portions of the roof trusses. And what I've got, it's a very faint line. It's not hypercritical, but essentially I've measured up along the sheet to my mark on the bottom side where my rafter or my truss tails are, kind of up there. And so it's about 25 inches from the edge of this plywood sheath back. And I've got a red line, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set my blade on my circle saw to the same thickness as this plywood. I don't want to cut deep into the rafter tails. And at this point, I'm just going to cut it to kind of expose and take off this plywood sheet. That'll make it easier for me to get my sawzall in from the top and cut across to nip off the tails of these trusses. So this is where we're at now. We got that old soffit cut out of the way with the ends of the roof trusses cut flush the front of that sheathing, and then I've framed up from there. Unfortunately, it hit right between two of my existing rafters, and so I had to put some of these kind of crib boards in there to catch the top plate of my of my wall here. Next step will be to put the OSB on and close that up. However, before doing so, I've got to run these wires up to a center position, and I'll put up some kind of nailer plate so that I can hang whatever my future light fixture is. So before I close everything off, I'll need to cut that hole down into the original roof and run those cables up, and then close everything up with the OSB. All right, here we're at. We've completed the roof and the structural framing of this porch. We've got the shingles on. Everything's pretty well dried in, aside from the fascia, tin, and soffit and such. But we had a pretty good downpour last night. Made sure that there were no leaks or anything. There's a hole cut into the existing roof to allow airflow up and into this new kind of portion area behind my faux wall here. What I'll end up doing is running my soffit in behind where the Tamlin wrap is. I'll use some J channel or maybe like an F channel, depending on where it needs to go, to catch the end of the soffit. And I think we're going to do some 12-foot soffit runs across this vaulted roof ceiling here. Moving now onto the decking portion, you can see that the porch section has already been done. This is some of Fibron's IPE colored composite decking, and it's using the hidden fastener system. I had alluded to this earlier, but what I was going to do and what's shown here is the feature that I wanted to put in around my posts. It's kind of a picture framing where I've got a miter joint that cuts around the posts, and I've got about an inch overhang on my decking. I've got a little toenail screw coming in from the edge to kind of pinch the two corners together. And I've got enough screws around the perimeter to kind of hold everything in place. You'll find if you go through the Fibron documentation that depending on the temperature when you install it, you actually have to leave a slightly larger or smaller gap at your ends just due to thermal expansion of the boards. Right now with the temperature we've got, it's about an eighth of an inch at either end, so 1/4 inch on your overall length. When looking at the floor joists that we've got in our deck, you'd seen those framed up, but what I've got now is some butyl tape along the tops of them. The butyl tape's used to prevent water from being held directly against the wood top, as what might be found kind of pinched between the composite decking and these floor joists. So the butyl tape seals the wood somewhat and should hopefully increase the longevity of the joists by preventing any kind of rot at the top, like what you might see if it wasn't wasn't installed. I actually ran out of some butyl tape in some cases, so I have some extra flashing tape run under some of the wider sections. And actually these sections became so wide because I've actually got a floor joist here, and then my doubled up joist on the ends like you'd seen. And then I have kind of a supporting piece in the middle, and that's because my floorboards are going to come in, my deck boards are going to come in and terminate here, and I need some way of supporting the ends of them. But all in all, it's going pretty well. We've got a picture frame kind of look going on this side too. Same miter joints that are coming around and the same kind of overhang. So real briefly, I just wanted to talk about the different types of fasteners that I'm familiar with using. On this deck, we're actually using a combination of these Camo clips along with VersaClips. So we ended up running out of these halfway through on the porch portion and picked up some of these at our local Lowe's. They're kind of nice, and I'll tell you the reason that I decided to go with these guys for finishing out is that these are an all-metal clip, and the mechanism's kind of nice that your screw into the joist is done at an angle like shown. So this side with the teeth goes into the previous run of board, and then what you'll do is this actually tightens and sucks into the wood, both with a downward and rearward motion. I'm probably describing that kind of poorly, but essentially what you'll see is like what's shown here, where this clip is installed, let's see, in this orientation, and when that screw gets tightened, it's pulling my deck board tight to the previous one as well as down. Another feature I kind of like about this is that it's got this small bent over finger on this side, and And what that does is that acts as a gauge to ensure that you're getting consistent spacing between the boards. One of the first types that we had used were these camo clips though. And I had picked these specifically because I like the idea of them having a metal tab on them. There's a couple different varieties of clips that use all plastic designs. These ones have painted stainless steel clips on them. I like the idea of that because of the downward motion of them, and just the holding strength of the steel tab on them. These have these odd fingers on them, and that's so that you can actually place them on your joist and just leave them in place. The only downside is that because they are a horizontal tab, sometimes you'll have to lift them up or rock them back and forth to get one row lined up with the previous. These work in that you have to put this in, get your next board in place, squeeze them together, and then draw your screw tight. Because if you put this one tight first, it'll pinch down on your previous run, cause this to nosedive like this so that you can't get your next one in. I think the holding strength of them is pretty nice. It's just a little bit more awkward to work with. And then the last clip to compare against, these are some of the Trex clips. You can see these are all plastic design. They work a little differently in that they just kind of sit on top of the wood and you slam them into place and push them down. I think they're probably similar to the camo clip ones though, where you need to have the next run of boards before you actually draw them tight. We didn't end up using these for any of our project. One last comment maybe between these ones is that while these are vertically installed screws, you could uninstall a row down the road without having to do any extra work in order to get a single board out if you needed to replace it or if it was damaged or cut wrong or something. So you just take out the two screws on the two outsides and pull them up. These VersaClip ones though, because they come in at an angle, you may have to take out quite a run of boards in order to get them out and get access to them. So something just to keep in mind as you're considering doing a project like this for yourself. Something to point out on this, whatever side is your finish up side, once it gets installed, if you're using a circular saw like I am, have your board flipped over because your saw blade's coming up like this. So it'll kind of leave this nasty edge from the plastic on that side. But then your finished edge will look real nice and clean on the other side. Sometimes, I mean, obviously look to see if your decking's got any kind of defects or anything that would make you want to keep one side up versus the other. But also some of these actually have a little bit of a cup to them, like any construction product. They're never perfectly true. So just maybe check that which way your cup is if it's got one. In my case, it's cup up like this. That's why I had it flipped over. So I'm using my flat blade as a guide on this side. That's because it measures about 1/8 of an inch, and that's what I need. Sometimes to get these things started, I'm using a rubber mallet and tilting it up so that it can get that front lip of the tongue into these clips that are already in place. You can kind of just go down the line, getting them all preset. Otherwise you'll be fighting it more when you're doing the screwing. What I've been using is instead of like an impact driver, I'm just using my normal drill with the clutch setting on, and that's because the impact driver's got a little bit too much torque. It'll crack off these screws. But if you use the torque, the clutch, you know, you can run it hard and let it stop for you.